My dear, I am not afraid. These were the opening words of Edith Thompson's last letter, written on the cold evening of January 8, 1923. She sat in her prison cell at Holloway, a dim light flickering above her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to leave behind. Outside, the winter wind howled against the stone walls. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of damp stone and candle wax. Edith's pen scratched slowly over the paper, each word carrying the echo of a life now counted in hours. Her final letter was not a confession, nor a plea for forgiveness. It was a farewell, a fragile bridge between the living and the dead. She addressed it to her family, speaking of love, of memories, and of the hope that her soul might find peace beyond the cold cell walls. For Edith, writing was more than a habit. It was a refuge. Even now, facing the gallows, she turned to paper as if it could preserve some part of her spirit. Every line was deliberate, carefully chosen, as if she knew the words might outlive her body. This letter would become a haunting piece of history, not because of what it revealed about her crime, but because of what it revealed about her humanity. The way she chose to leave the world spoke louder than the accusations that had brought her here. At that moment, she was no longer the condemned Mrs. Thompson in the newspapers. She was simply Edith, a woman with a pen, a piece of paper, and the knowledge that her time was almost over. She folded the letter neatly, sealed it with shaking hands, and placed it on the small table by her bed. The candle beside it burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her. The war dress would collect the letter in the morning. By then, Edith Thompson would be gone, and the words she had written would be all that remained of her voice. Long before the prison walls and the dim light of Holloway, Edith Thompson's life unfolded in the bustling streets of early 20th century London. Born in 1893, she grew up in a modest home, the eldest daughter in a family that valued appearances and respectability. She was bright, ambitious, and carried a romantic streak that often pulled her thoughts beyond the gray rooftops of her neighborhood. Edith's early years were marked by small joys, reading novels by the fire, tending the flowers in the tiny garden, and daydreaming about faraway places. Friends remembered her as lively and charming, a woman who seemed to carry an entire world of imagination in her eyes. In 1916, she married Percy Thompson, a man solid and dependable, but lacking the spark she had always longed for. Their life together was outwardly stable, marked by social dinners, Sunday walks, and the polite conversations expected at the time. Yet under the surface, Edith felt an emptiness she could not ignore. It was during these years that Edith began to write more frequently, letters, diary entries, even small pieces of fiction. Her writing became a private escape, a place where she could pour her longing, her frustration, and her dreams. The war years changed everything. The streets grew quieter. Shadows of rationing and loss hung over the city. Edith's letters from that time carried a tone of restlessness, as if she was waiting for something or someone to arrive and break the monotony. That someone arrived in the form of Frederick Bywaters, a young merchant seaman and a friend of Percy's. Frederick was vibrant, adventurous, and spoke to Edith in a way that awakened her sense of romance again. What began as polite conversation soon turned into something far more dangerous. Their relationship grew in the shadows, stolen moments, whispered words, and letters sent in secret. In these letters, Edith's words flowed like water, full of longing and escape, revealing a part of herself she never showed her husband. Those letters, so full of desire and frustration, would one day become the very evidence used against her. Long before her last letter from prison, Edith had been writing the words that would seal her fate. October 3rd, 1922, began like any other autumn evening in London. The air was crisp, the streets damp from an earlier rain, and the lamps cast a golden glow onto the slick pavement. Edith and Percy had gone to the theater, a small, ordinary outing in what appeared to be an ordinary marriage. To those around them, nothing seemed unusual. Edith wore a dark coat and gloves, her hair neatly styled, her demeanor composed. Percy walked beside her, his pace steady, his expression unreadable. They spoke little, their words swallowed by the hum of the city. But as the couple made their way home that night, they were unaware, or perhaps too aware, of what awaited them. From the shadows, Frederick Bywaters emerged. He had been waiting, his mind set on a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The attack was sudden and violent. Percy was stabbed repeatedly in the quiet street. Neighbors heard the commotion, the muffled cries, the desperate shuffle of footsteps on the cobblestones. Edith's role in that moment has remained the subject of endless debate. She did not wield the knife, yet her earlier letters, full of fantasies about life without her husband, became the damning thread that prosecutors would later unravel in court. When the police arrived, Percy was already gone. Edith stood in shock, her gloves stained, her mind reeling between disbelief and a terrible understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. Frederick fled but was soon caught. Edith, too, was arrested, not for the act itself, but for the words she had written, which were interpreted as a conspiracy to kill. The theater tickets from that night still rested in her coat pocket, silent witnesses to the last hours of her freedom. That night marked the true end of Edith's life as she had known it. The following months would be spent under the shadow of trial, scandal, and the ever-closing grip of the gallows. The night before her execution, Holloway Prison was unervingly silent. Edith sat on the narrow bed in her cell, the dim gaslight casting long, fragile shadows on the walls. She had been given a final meal, though she barely touched it. Hunger seemed irrelevant now. Her mind was fixed on the hours ahead. The wardress had spoken gently to her, offering small comforts. Tea, a warmer blanket, a moment of quiet prayer. Edith accepted with a faint smile, but her thoughts were elsewhere, drifting between memories of childhood summers and the harsh reality that the dawn would bring the end. A chaplain visited, speaking of forgiveness, redemption, and the promise of another life beyond this one. Edith listened politely, her hands folded in her lap. She had heard such words before, but tonight they felt different, heavier, more final. At her small desk, she began her last letter. The pen felt cold in her hand, the ink thick and slow on the paper. She wrote carefully, as if each word were a thread binding her to the people she loved. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a quiet acceptance that her story was about to close. She wrote to her family, her mother, her sisters, assuring them she was not afraid and that they must not grieve too deeply. She spoke of love, of gratitude for the life she had been given, and of the hope that they would remember her for more than the trial and the scandal. Outside the barred window, the winter wind pressed against the glass, carrying with it the muffled sounds of a city that would wake tomorrow to headlines announcing her death. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and set it beside the small candle on her table. The flame flickered as if acknowledging the weight of the words it had witnessed being born. Edith laid down on her bed, pulling the blanket to her shoulders. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in a kind of surrender. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, marking the slow, inevitable march toward the morning. Dawn came cold and gray over Holloway Prison on January 9th, 1923. Inside the stone walls, the air was heavy with silence. At precisely 9 a.m., Edith Thompson walked to the gallows, escorted by wardresses on either side. Her steps were slow but steady, her eyes fixed ahead, as if already looking beyond the place where she stood. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, their breath visible in the winter air. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others out of a grim sense of justice. They would not see the execution itself, but they would read every detail in the afternoon papers. The execution was swift. Moments later, the prison bell tolled, a sound that rolled over the rooftops like a somber announcement to the city. Edith Thompson was gone. Her last letter was delivered to her family later that day. Those who read it spoke of its quiet dignity, the absence of anger, the warmth of her final words despite the coldness of her fate. For them, it was not the letter of a criminal, but of a daughter, a sister, a woman saying goodbye. In the days that followed, the press feasted on the story. Headlines screamed of scandal and romance, of betrayal and murder. Yet buried beneath the sensationalism was the simple truth of a human life cut short, and the fragile paper that carried her final thoughts. Over the years, Edith's case has been re-examined, debated, and reinterpreted. Some call her a victim of circumstance, others a willing conspirator. The truth remains tangled between evidence emotion, and the weight of public opinion. But for those who have held her last letter in their hands, the memory of Edith Thompson is shaped less by the court's verdict and more by the quiet grace of her farewell. Her words continue to echo, a reminder that even in the darkest endings, humanity can still be found. And so, a century later, the image of a candlelit cell, a folded letter on a wooden desk, and the final line, "I am not afraid," still lingers like the soft, fading sound of a voice that refuses to be forgotten